Welcome, everybody, to the first ever episode of Big Daddy and Son, the Father Son podcast, this Saturday afternoon war. This, in my thoughts, this was never meant to be a Father and Son podcast. What this was meant to be for me was me sharing my memories of World of Sport Wrestling. You know, I know I'm only young, I'm 13, but I am a wrestling historian. I know all the facts, I know all the information, and this guy here claims that he knows everything about World of Sport Wrestling, that he's been a lifelong wrestling fan, and trust me, he doesn't. So, while we go along with this podcast, we're going to see how much this wrestling expert, self-proclaimed Big Daddy, knows about wrestling. But we'll do his introductions properly. So this is the biggest Big Daddy in all of Father and Son podcasting. This is Darren Wet.
Hi folks, yes, I am a bit of an expert in these things. And I took that line from Keaton's favourite programme. I am a bit of an expert in those things. And you can work that one out yourself. Who says that? Anyway, yes, I am the biggest Big Daddy fan in the land. And I'll tell you a little bit about Keaton. Keaton is a wrestling guru. He loves his wrestling. He loves his history around wrestling. And he actually wrestles himself. He wrestles for a company called Northern Ireland Professional Wrestling. And outside of that, he runs his own podcasts and he loves to pick wrestlers' brains about how it was for them back in the day. And that's why he's asked me to get involved, because he knew I would help him out with all of the real facts and all of the real information from World of Sport days, because let's face it, he's a little whippersnapper who wasn't even born.
I know way more than you do. All you done was sit there and watch it. But anyway, we're going to see how that happens in this podcast. But we're very happy to be airing the first ever episode, and honestly, with beyond all the jokes and everything, the real reason we want to start this podcast is to bring back nostalgia for all you people who have watched it, and even for some new people that are coming in and watching it. They're not too sure about World Sport Wrestling, but they love wrestling and they're younger, maybe in their 30s or even 20s or people my age. Everyone is welcome to join us, and we're very fan interactive, so we'll have a couple of comments to bring in, but we're going to bring that in later after we talk about our first episode, the first bell, the golden age, how World of Sport Wrestling, the golden age of wrestling actually started.
Yeah. And I suppose back in the day, I was born in 1973, so you can work out my age with your calculator. I sat and watched wrestling on the TV with my father. We did have colour TV, I must say, although Keaton will tell me I'm a caveman. We did have colour TV, and we had BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. In our country, it was called Ulster Television in Northern Ireland. In 1982, a fourth channel, it was so exciting. We got a fourth channel on our terrestrial TVs, and it was called originally Channel 4. And they came in with, you know, some of their sort of outside of the box, you know, outside of boring BBC TV channeling, and they brought in some wacky shows. And then in 1997, we got a fifth TV channel. Now, back in these days, there was no internet, there was no Netflix, there was no YouTube or anything, so you couldn't really access a lot of things online. So whatever your daddy in them days, you listened to your daddy much more than you do these days, and your daddy had control of the remote control. So whatever he put on TV, I had to sit and watch it, and I was sick looking at the news, I was sick looking at, you know, political programs, and I wasn't overly keen on sword fencing and a variety of things. But when Saturday at 4 o'clock came, I was in my element. I would even pull down a cushion from the sofa, maybe lie on the chair or lie on the floor and sit with my dad and watch World of Sport Wrestling. It hit the screens with a bang. What do you know about that?
Yeah, well, before World of Sport Wrestling even came, you probably don't even know this, but before World of Sport Wrestling even came, ITV actually launched in September 1955 and wanted something to compete with BBC. It was anything to compete with BBC. And their way of competing with BBC, they wanted something cheap and exciting, and that's how, I suppose, wrestling came in. So before World of Sport even existed, the brought in from actually in World of Sport. So before it was called World of Sport, wrestling was around TVs by actually 1955. Before it was called World of Sport, so it was a brand new channel ITV was, and I was trying to get people to watch what they wanted, and it was something cheap, and what they wanted was something cheap and exciting, as I said, and it was anything to compete. So they wanted their professional wrestling. So British wrestling first aired. So the first ITV wrestling match actually aired in West Ham Baths in London, and which was, to be honest with you, it was a huge gamble.
Why was it such a gamble?
Because everyone was used to putting it in big stadiums, like sports halls.
Yeah.
I know you've played in a lot of the sports halls and stadiums, so you would know. But West Ham Baths was a really strange place of putting it. But it first aired in ITV and West Ham Baths, and it was a massive hit. So it worked out completely well.
Yeah.
And this was before World Sport even existed.
But yes, I noticed in some of the footage that we've rewatched from back in the day, the target audience, it was, I think it were people in their 50s and 60s with their handbags and men in suits, and I know it was a different era, but was it targeted at kids, do you think?
Absolutely not. I completely, finally we agree on something, this fella and some agree on something, but no, it was not targeted on kids. I think it was more targeted on old people, because it wasn't the kind of entertainment that you see now with WWE and professional wrestling. What you seen then was a sportsmanship kind of wrestling. They didn't really care about much storylines. I know they had some storylines with Kendo Nagasaki and things like that, which they really done storytelling really well. But they didn't care as much about that as they did about the actual wrestling that was in there, the actual style of British wrestling, which we'll get to. But the actual style of British wrestling is very different from what we see now. And I think that the kids wanted to see more entertainment, the way they saw I don't know what kind of TV shows were on that time, but most kids these days, when they're young, would want to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something that is entertaining. And for them, that wasn't entertaining. But for the people who actually understand it, the older people who maybe hate the baddies and love the goodies, and the old people who just want to get out for something exciting, for a wrestling show or whatever they want to get to, for something exciting, and to boo people, and sometimes that's what they just wanted to see. So for me, I think the target audience would not have been for kids. It would be for more older people who understood what wrestling was really about and the kind of technical and great style that was pro wrestling without the entertainment style that we see now.
That's interesting, because I sneakily, and I'm not sure what was in my father's head back in the day, I sneakily put on American style wrestling when Keaton was only about 6 on the TV to see if he would like it. And you don't know this, but that was in my thought process from back in the day. And I put a variety of things on from sort of appropriately aged from where he was at. And we got to the point where I was thinking, what could he be interested in? And I put on American style wrestling. It was on one of the channels of the plethora of channels that we have now. And Keaton was transfixed. His eyes were in awe. His jaw was on the floor. He thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And I think, looking back, when I was slightly younger than Keaton, did my father put the same thing on for me to be in awe and want to sit with him? Because I'd have been maybe a little bit hyperactive, and I'd have been up and out and not listening. Well, this is so boring, the news, or this is so boring, sword fencing or whatever, golf or cricket. And when the wrestling came on, I wasn't moving. I was sitting there till it was on, until it was over. And I wonder, was that what was going on for my dad back in the day? I know I sneakily put it on for Keaton, and he fell in love with it, and he hasn't stopped ever since.
Yeah, and that's never since that day. And you probably didn't expect that, but something that I think as well is that if you and your father were watching British wrestling at that time, I bet you if you put on a British wrestling match, now that I'm older, I understand how good British wrestling really is. But I bet you when I was about 5 years old, if you put on a British wrestling match, when you heard Kemp Alton commentating and you saw the slower paced maybe kind of wrestling, I would be saying, get this off now.
Well, that's because you're young and inexperienced and immature. Let's face it, I am the expert in these things. And the reality is, old style British chain wrestling was far superior to anything in the wrestling world that we see today.
I see your point, but what I'm saying is, when I was about 5 years old, I'd be wanting to see that kind of entertainment, not that kind of British wrestling. But now I'm older, I kind of understand how good that was. But trust me, this American style wrestling is way better than this so-called amazing British wrestling. Yeah. I don't understand what all this hype's about.
Well, speaking of hype, speaking of entertainment, some of you guys will recognise what I'm holding up, if you can see it. If you can't see it, I'll describe it to the listeners. It's a man with a 40-inch chest, wearing a golden hat and a red sparkly robe, and red, white and blue on his white singlet, and on the front of it says Big Daddy. Now, if you wanted entertainment, Big Daddy drew in the crowds. Tell us what you know about Big Daddy, Keaton.
Well, I know a lot about him. It was first named Shirley Crabtree, so the best man in British wrestling was a guy named Shirley.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. It's quite a female name, but it's fine, And you're right. He drew in lots of crowds. Drew in so much crowds, and he was one of the most popular people at the time. Now, the Crabtree family were the people who kind of ruled joint promotions and this big promotion, obviously, Dale Martin promotions and things like that. But it originally it took over and created what was known as British wrestling. Max Crabtree, Brian Crabtree, and the whole Crabtree family. They're all very good wrestlers. And Big Daddy later became one of the best wrestlers, or one of the most famous wrestlers in British wrestling because of the Crabtree family. And this man, because of his size, and I also think because of his humorous kind of style, and he would come out with the hat, and the kids loved him. The kids, that's maybe why some kids love British wrestling.
Yeah.
Because the kids really did love him, and he would come out with his hat, and he was one of the fan favourites. He had an enemy called Jan Haystacks, who's also one of the best British wrestlers of all time. I think I prefer him more than Big Daddy.
And here he is. This is Jan Haystacks. For the fans who can't see, Jan Haystacks wore it was like a big bear skin rug, and his belt was a rope that probably didn't have a belt to go around him. He was massive, absolutely massive. Would he have been 7 foot, 7'1"?
Yep.
And he was from Scotland.
Yep.
Yeah. And Jan Haystacks was the ultimate heel that we would say today. Back in the day, he was the ultimate baddie. He was an absolute giant, but the fans hated him. We would have had old grannies sort of hitting him with their handbags, and every time he walked out, they booed him. But these two were the literal giants of wrestling back in the 80s.
And I think the kids would have been scared of Jan Haystacks. I know he was a lovely man. Yeah, I think the kids might have been scared of him. And, I know he's such a nice guy. I've seen some of his interviews. He's just a really, really, really lovely guy. And I know and you're probably surprised how much I know about Big Daddy Jan Haystacks, yeah? And they had a match, and I'm not surprised, it sold out Wembley Arena.
Yeah.
Two of the most biggest attractions, I suppose, larger than life in size and in personalities and with popularity. These two sold out Wembley Arena, which was a match, I'm going to admit it, was not very good technical wrestling. Did not get into technical wrestling. They're really just belly punching. But what was good about this was the storytelling in the match, and that's how good these people actually were, because they had the story. They knew what they were doing in the ring, even though maybe they weren't the fastest moving in the ring. That's what sold out Wembley Arena.
Well, I've heard different stories from people who have been behind the scenes in the actual dressing rooms with Big Daddy and Jan Haystacks, and we'll not get into too much of that, but I know that from my own parents, they met Jan Haystacks in a place called Glengormley in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. And back in the day, there was a shopping centre called Crazy Prices. For anyone who is from Northern Ireland, they might recognise Crazy Prices. It was bought over by a big company called Stewart's, and then it was bought over by what you might have heard of, Tesco, now who own it. But in this big car park, Jan Haystacks came to Glengormley. My parents went up, they loved the wrestling, and my mum and dad saw him and met him. They didn't have access to mobile phones back then because they weren't invented with cameras and videos on them, but the story is that my dad told me that Jan Haystacks, 7 foot tall, probably about 5 foot wide, got into a little mini car. Now, mini cars were minuscule. It was sort of like something you would see, a kid's yellow and red car that they would have in Smith's Toys nowadays. They were tiny. But he managed to get into a mini car and for photographs to promote this mini car and also promote this big shopping centre that there was back there 40 years ago or so. And when they got chatting with him, they said he was the absolute nicest gentleman that they could ever wish to have met or have met. And he was the most ultimate bad guy in the screen, but obviously behind the scenes there was a little bit of let's say play acting to a certain extent.
Yeah, and did they share with did he share anything? Did they share what Jan Haystacks said to them? Can you remember now?
I can't remember the exact wording, but they just said that he was really nice, and he stopped and spoke to people, and and people sometimes would have bought a ticket for those type of shows, not necessarily to see the big belly bouncing, you know, lack of potentially really cool moves. I don't see any ropes holding these guys if they had to try to get up on the top rope and do high ropes moves. But it was more the spectacle to see someone who was such a giant. People paid money just to go and actually see them in person.
Yeah, that's what they done. I know this was the British Wrestling podcast, but that's what they done for Andre the Giant as well, and the WWF. You know, these larger than life superstars like Jan Haystacks, Big Daddy, Andre the Giant, Big Show, people like that. People are actually paid to see them just in person because of the size of the people. You know.
Yeah, and I believe there's some comments that have came in for people who are telling us a little bit about their memories of World of Sport. So, want me to read the first one out?
Yeah, you read the first one out.
And this is an honour to actually be reading this out. Marty Jones, in my opinion, was the best, the most talented, the hardest, the most skillful, and the best storyteller, the best seller of his generation. Marty Jones commented into Keaton's post on World of Sport, so it's a real honour to actually have this 7-time champion, European champion.
He was the middleweight champion.
Middleweight champion.
Of World of Sport Wrestling, so 7-time middleweight champion.
Okay. And just saying, you know, that they started off in West Ham baths and stuff. Marty Jones actually posted here to Keaton and he said, World of Sport Wrestling was my shop window. 15 million viewers every Saturday. If you had a good match on a Saturday afternoon, the punters had a taster. So they came out to watch it at their local hall. Ever grateful for many, many great matches on a Saturday and Wednesday night with fantastic worldwide grapplers. What about that? Marty Jones commenting in. And that's Marty's memories. It was a shop window, and he was right. Most people would have watched it on TV. Not everyone would have got the opportunity to see it live and up close. We were lucky to have a place called the King's Hall in Belfast where the World of Sport would have travelled to as well.
Exactly. Damian Morris has some brief memories that he has due to time restrictions. He wants to bring out some brief memories. So we used to love Les Kellett when he used to fake being injured. I love Les Kellett. What a great wrestler. All the wrestlers would go and try to get hold of him or hit him with a forearm smash, and he would move out of the way like he was unsteady on his feet. Eventually he would bounce back off the ropes and get hold of his opponent or hit them with his own forearm. As a kid, I used to think it was hilarious. Another vivid memory was the old grannies. Well, they looked old to me as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old in their big coats and scarves or cardigans and mid-thigh skirts, getting up out of the front row seats and swinging their handbags at one of the well-known body wrestlers.
I remember it well.
Yep, so that's from Damian Morris. So thanks everyone that's commented on this as well.
My uncle told me as well, when they came to the King's Hall, my granny, she hit one of the wrestlers with a handbag too, and they were afraid that they were going to turn on them as well. So that definitely did happen.
Yep. So, when at that time all the grannies that was when wrestling was most popular with grannies, I suppose, with old people. Nowadays it isn't really all that much. It's more kids and young adults. Yeah.
I suppose World of Sport went for, I think, about 1,000 shows. World of Sport Wrestling, and when Dickie Davies announced it with the little grey streak and all in his hair, it's lovely to think back on and even look back on. Thankfully, there are some things on YouTube now, and there were some amazing matches. I suppose looking back, for me, it was real nostalgia. There were some amazing matches. My dad and I agreed with him, got turned off wrestling when, I suppose it was like maybe the 90s, when we were getting more channels on TV. We were getting access to it was late at night, we would get access to the American wrestling, and it was all high flying, it was all top ropes, it was Hulk Hogan dropping his leg on someone and they would be unconscious. It was very hard to believe, whereas I think the British wrestling was very easy to believe, and that's why so many old grannies were hitting people with handbags, because it was so believable.
You know what? For once, you've touched a good point.
Mm-hmm.
For once, most kids at that age will believe that the more theatrical side of American wrestling, the storylines and everything. And I think in my opinion, I think American wrestling's very cool, but it's a whole different thing. I love British wrestling so much. They're two. I wouldn't even call it the same sport. I really wouldn't.
Yeah.
I would call it sports entertainment. I call British wrestling a sport because they use more believable stuff. Like Ken and exactly with the mask. I know maybe some people wouldn't believe that, but he is a mysterious guy in real life.
Yeah.
So they used the real life gimmicks, and maybe that's why a lot of the old grannies might have believed it. And to be honest with you, I believe it as well. Most of it was true. The kind of storylines and the kind of the technical wrestling. All that stuff is real wrestling, technical wrestling. So that is kind of true, and no wonder them grannies believed that. But I'll have another comment from Pretty Leech 77.
Okay.
If you want to read that out.
Go ahead, yes. Pretty Leachy 77. One of my memories is the wrestling match in the mid-80s, I think, where Marty Jones regained his world title from Dave Fit Finlay. It was an amazing fight. It really was. And, from being from Northern Ireland, when we heard that there was a guy just down the road from us, he lived about 6 miles from where we lived, and Fit Finlay was breaking into the scene. He came from a big family of, his father was a wrestler. They wrestled all around the place. Yes, Keaton has interviewed his father. In fact, behind me is one of the posters from one of the local shows, and we had the likes of Rasputin and others. But when Fit Finlay came on the scene, it was just even better for us, especially as a kid, when you're proud and you want the local guy to do well on the TV wrestling. So when Fit Finlay came in, he was hard as nails. He would have take it to anybody. But Fit Finlay ended up having the belt, having the title, and it was Marty's turn then to do his best to get it back. And who better, as I say, my favourite wrestler, Marty Jones. He did what he had to do. Absolutely brilliant match. Another one of Keaton's favourites was with Marty Jones, wasn't it?
Yep. So that match was incredible. Just to get to that as well, what they done was this kind of switched it over with belts. They kept going over and over again with the belts, and they kept winning it over and over again, maybe about 5 times.
Yeah.
But one of my favourite matches in all of British wrestling is again another match with a guy who's probably one of the best, if not the best British wrestler of all time, where Mark Roco faced off Marty Jones. This guy, Mark Roco, I think is the best British wrestler of all time.
He was very good.
His storylines and what he could do was just incredible. He had the character. It was, in my opinion, the guy that America missed out on. But he had the best match ever, in my opinion, in British wrestling. These guys knew how to work with each other so well, and I think it was the best match ever when Mark Rocco faced Marty Jones. They had so much in-ring chemistry with each other, and that's what you need in wrestling, a lot of in-ring chemistry, especially in British wrestling. You know how to work with each other, especially in British wrestling.
What made it so good? How did they make it so good? It was a smashing match, I have to agree, but where did this in-ring chemistry come from, and how did they know exactly that the other person was going to do the move that they did before they did it?
Well, I suppose it depends on how good the wrestler is. So even if you don't know each other, you can still research someone and know what they're going to do. You can be that good for a wrestler, but the main thing is you need to know the guy, you need to know them backstage, and you need to talk to them maybe before the match. What I was told by Kung Fu Eddie Hamill in one of my interviews was he was a really good British wrestler back in the day on World of Sport. He was the amazing Kung Fu. Eddie Hamill, he told me, you make me look good and I'll make you look good. And that was the key thing in British wrestling. And that's what made your opponent look good. So that's something that Kung Fu Eddie Hamill always told me. And maybe Marty Jones made Mark Rocco look good. Mark Rocco made Marty Jones look good. And that kind of chemistry is what carried that match and made it look so well. And that's coming from, not from me, have to admit, not from me, from one of the best wrestlers in all of Northern Irish wrestling history, and even in British wrestling, who has wrestled all over Wales. He actually lives in Wales right now. He's wrestled all over with Ori William wrestling and the World of Sport wrestling, the amazing Kung Fu. Yeah.
And he really looked the part. He was a handsome man. He wore it looked like a judo outfit, a white outfit, and he was high flying. He was one of the first to be up on the top ropes and doing all those high flying moves, and it was amazing to see. And we were obviously really proud of him because he came from Northern Ireland. There were others coming through, like the great Rasputin, who was a mad monk. There were so many great characters. King Kong Kirk, and Alan Kilby and Mick McManus, and who was the guy, Keaton, who rolled up in a ball and people couldn't get him out of the moves?
Johnny Sin.
Yep. the people just couldn't unlock him.
Yeah,
He was in a knot.
And when we talk about the style of British wrestling, the best style and the guy who worked his craft was Johnny Saint.
Yeah.
The best technical wrestler. So the best actual technical wrestler at the technical standpoint is Johnny Saint, in my opinion. But the best wrestler overall was Mark Roco, in my opinion, in British wrestling.
Well, there were many. You know, it's really hard to say there's one. You know, if we had a, what do you call it, a Mount Rushmore?
Mount Rushmore.
If you had a Mount Rushmore, it'd be really hard to pick only 4. For me, I would be going with Marty Jones. I'd be going with Johnny Saint. I would also have Fit Finlay in there. And my 4th one, they say the 4th one's the hardest to fit in because there's so many and you don't want to let someone else out who should be there. I like Les Kellett. Now, he was sort of a bit earlier. But he was hard as nails. Pulled all sorts of crazy faces. But he was like a body you kind of loved.
Yeah, the guys, my top 4, you know, it's so hard to pick because there's so many names who you can't forget. And then someone else maybe seeing this video will be thinking, why'd you not on him? Why'd you not on him? But for me, I think we'll work on this. So from a technical standpoint, the best British wrestler of all time, I think without a doubt it's Johnny Saint, his technical standpoint. And then so Johnny Saint would be one, and then next for a kind of show matchup, I'm bringing it to where it was, kind of like the Hulk Hogan of British wrestling, who brought it to where it was Big Daddy. So you gotta add Big Daddy on that list. Maybe he's not the best technical wrestler, maybe he's not the most skillful, but he has to be in that list because he did do all the showmanship and bring it to where it was.
He sold the tickets, didn't he?
And then another one for me would be Mick McManus.
Okay.
So this guy had, in my opinion, had carried British wrestling. He was one of the coaches and would help. I don't know if you know this, but he helped a lot of them and trained a lot of them.
Yeah, I hear he was a hard man.
He was a very hard man. So Mick McManus was one of the guys because he was a gentleman. I know he was a heel, but he was a guy that everybody loved to hate, but he also had that kind of gentleman character. So Mick McManus for me as well. And then my 4th one is, this is a hard one. The 4th one's always the hardest thing
That
he
is,
says.
isn't it?
I'll go with World of Sport Wrestling. You know, there's so many. I'll go with Exotic Adrian Street.
Good call. Yeah.
Because the guy had the thing that really shocked me about him was Vince McMahon actually rang Adrian Street and says to him, would you like to come to our company, WWF? Adrian Street wanted to stick to the old British wrestling. He told him, no, I'm not doing that. So Vince McMahon actually got another guy to copy Adrian Street's gimmick. And he copied Adrian Street's gimmick. This is how good this guy was because he didn't want to come to it. So they got a copycat of Adrian Street just to copy his gimmick. That's how much of a worldwide star he was.
So Adrian Street, he used to work down the coal mines, and it was a big, hard, sort of muscly, tough living, I'm sure. And he was probably quite young when he didn't want that lifestyle anymore. And he chose not to go to America because it was all high flying and showboating, and you know, and I'm not going to say that terrible word that they don't allow me to say in wrestling in case I get a receipt from Keaton. But it was let's face it, it was quite a showman sort of era when the wrestling came to the American pro wrestling came to our screens, and Adrian Street chose not to go there. Yep. Adrian Street, who wore mascara and lipstick and dressed with did he have a wig?
Yeah.
And it was sort of like very
he tried to kiss them in the ring and all. But I know that sounds pretty crazy for especially at that era. You know, people get things thrown at him and all, but people learned to love him because he was so good in the ring. And
that's very talented. And
the thing was, that kind of character is what brought you and got you over. You know, these different larger than life characters is what got you over in British wrestling. And I suppose even when Vince McMahon wanted him, and he was good friends with Triple H and people like that.
Yeah.
And his legacy will forever be remembered. But yeah, he was an incredible wrestler in the ring. And you know, something that I've really realised about him is when he went to America, he did go to America for a while, but he didn't work in WWF or anything. But he always stuck to the British wrestling. He always loved British wrestling, and he said he truly believes, this is in his words, I truly believe that the future of UK wrestling is in good hands with NXT UK, because he was one of the he helped in the Performance Centre in NXT UK along with Johnny Saint and Marty Jones and a few others.
Well, that's it, and it speaks volumes that Fit Finlay is involved with WWE. Adrian Street had quite a
big influence
over there as well. a lot of the guys from Great Britain who were the most talented wrestlers in the world, in my opinion, they really helped to strengthen WWE as we know it now, and help it to become the worldwide sensation that it is. But as I say, the reason we get into that is because I kind of went off wrestling, and so did my father, when we got to see so many of the nonsensical things that were so hard to believe. But we could be wrong, and I do enjoy wrestling now, the pro wrestling side of it.
Yeah, and something I always do is I will always remember British wrestling, because in my style in the ring, I use the same kind of style that Johnny Saint would have. I'm planning on, I'm not going to give too much away, but I'm planning on using some moves in the ring of Johnny Saint's old move, the rust a bit. So,
Okay.
and it's a new variation of that. So, I will continue that along with the showmanship of American wrestling. There will be a lot of chain wrestling you'll be seeing from me in the future as well. So, yeah. And,
Good stuff.
But anyway, we've talked quite long enough.
Yeah, and how do you see this podcast going? So we've done the first bell today. What have you gotten? What are your plans for this? Because I genuinely just jumped in sort of last minute to give Keaton a hand, and I'm very happy to be here, I must say. And I suppose if I could ask you, listeners and viewers, who would your Mount Rushmore be? Stick it in the comment sections below if you get a chance. There were more than 1,000 episodes over 20 years of World of Sport Wrestling.
Yeah.
And I suppose looking back and then looking at a relaunch, we had Grado coming in for the new launch of World of Sport Wrestling, and we'll come to that. So there's 20 years to get through. There were so many really inspirational wrestlers that you could probably do a full episode on. There were fantastic matches that you could actually probably do a full episode on. We'll try and keep these episodes down to about 20 minutes.
Yeah, maybe we went over this time a tiny bit.
Well, sure, we'll see. It'll not need to be exact, but guys, thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. If you have any old memories of wrestling and anything you think that'd be useful for us to talk about, please feel free and send us a couple of comments.
This is what it's all about. And for anyone listening, remember the next episode tomorrow, without this guy here, the self-proclaimed Big Daddy, thankfully I get a break from him, who's the so-called expert here. I get a break from him, and I join legendary 5'10" world champion Crusher Crossan along with another legend. Now, this is a huge announcement. I'm bringing in WWF legend who's faced the likes of Rey Mysterio on WCW, is trained from the New Japan Dojo, and has made such a career for himself. Had some incredible matches with Marty Jannetty. He's been AWA tag team champion. He's been managed by the likes of Mr. Fuji and been in tag teams with Paul Diamond. This is none other, you guessed it, Pat Tanaka, coming on the my show tomorrow on KV with Keaton. So stay tuned for that.
That's amazing. Stay tuned, guys, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.